Bradley for that incredible introduction, and welcome everyone to the second debate of the Edinburgh Union. We are incredibly excited tonight as the oldest student debating society in the world and the newest student debating society in the world clash for the first time. And we are very pleased to welcome our guests from the Cambridge Union to talk about this motion. But before I get onto that, just a few notes of business. Unlike usual, our next debate is not in 2 weeks' time, but is next week. It is on This House Believes that immigration is the biggest issue facing the UK. I encourage you all to sign up for tickets, and I encourage you all to sign up to be speakers. And with that out of the way, let's move on to the main business. The motion before us tonight is, fittingly, this House would ignore university rankings. Now, international and domestic university rankings remain one of the most important indicators and tools for students applying to higher education. And as our higher education system becomes increasingly globalised, diverse and competitive, these rankings have taken on even more significance, particularly for universities amid financial difficulties. Yet questions remain around whether university rankings provide any meaningful comparison at all, or whether they instead reduce complex and deeply personal decisions into seemingly objective lists. And so, we would like to welcome from the Cambridge Union to open from the proposition Ted Yip, a second-year human and social and political science student at the University of Cambridge and an executive officer-elect of the Cambridge Union. Ted, the floor is yours.
So, before I start my speech, I'd just like to thank the committee of the Edinburgh Union for inviting us to speak to all of you today and for their warmest hospitality. The weather might be freezing, but your warmth lingers in our hearts. So, back to the motion. This House would ignore university rankings. As an international student myself, and as someone brought up in an Asian background, I have to admit that, at times, I myself am affected or am influenced by the ranking of universities. However, since I'm on the proposition of this debate tonight, I'm here to convince you that you do not fundamentally care about university rankings. What you do care about is the reputation, the excellence, and the historical background that is associated with these rankings. So my first point is, if any of you on the floor today know what the Goodhart's law is, it is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a good measure.
That's just your protected time, please.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So, when universities today in the UK are facing increased competition and they face funding cuts, they're trying to recruit the best international students from around the world so that they can fill in their budgetary gaps. We can see that universities are increasingly trying to target increases in rankings as their ultimate goal. However, I argue that this does not serve the student population that it's supposed to serve. For example, when we look at university rankings, prominent ones such as the Times Education or QS rankings, they often rely on nonsensical components such as heavy reliance on subjective reputation surveys or arbitrary metrics like international faculty ratios and biased research-focused bibliometrics that favour wealthy English-speaking institutions or those who have a STEM faculty, simply because it's easier for people in STEM to publish an article than those who study in humanities like me. In addition, I fundamentally don't think that numbers speak to the great difference between, I have to revise here, the Oxford style of education and other universities. Having gone to 2 universities myself, I understand what it means to study at Cambridge and another university which may also be very high ranking, for your reference, University College London, not because fundamentally I think that one university is worse than the other, but it's just because the education style is so different, and I don't think that a mere number on the ranking table could do it justice. For example, the supervision system that many of you might know uniquely belongs to Oxford and Cambridge is unparalleled. No other university, as far as I know, has employed this approach, and has been widely praised for its ability to instill critical thinking, to encourages digestion of knowledge in a way that other styles of teaching, such as essay-based assessment, which I have done before, cannot. I've had course mates who rejected Harvard, Stanford, Yale to come to Cambridge and do HSPS. And even though the rankings of these universities may be higher, the reason why people are drawn to Cambridge is not because of our ranking, but because of our academic excellence and our unique mode of teaching that is unparalleled. Well, moving on to the second part of my speech, given that this is a varsity speech, I thought maybe I should include some arguments that are less serious, so as to say. When you think about university rankings, again, I'm convinced that you don't actually care about it. What do you care about university rankings? Does university rankings convey a sense of prestige or reputation to you? Does it really? I'm sure in this room, none of you will believe that St. Andrews is actually a better university than Oxford or Cambridge, and I'm sorry, but I have to say it. This prestige or the academic rigor of these, traditionally ranked top universities is not something that a punitive number on a ranking table can encapsulate. And the same goes for example, in Cambridge, we have our own Tompkins table, which ranks each college's academic performance. Do we actually care about them? Not really. And I come from Christ. We rank second, but fundamentally, I don't think that matters.
One information. Don't we rank first most of the time?
Yeah, we do, but I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's Cambridge anyway, right?
Point of information.
Sure.
You say that one of the reasons that Cambridge is so excellent is because of the supervision system that you are able to get. But do you not believe that the university ranking system that prizes student experience and allows students to write into their ranking systems to say what they value most about the university is one of the reasons that Cambridge is able to continue to have such an expensive and tuition-intensive system such as the supervision system, because it pays to know that students enjoy them and they rank their universities highly.
Okay, so your entire argument is essentially saying that because university ranking systems prioritize student satisfaction and that's why we're allowed to have supervisions. I kid you not. I love supervisions. It makes me want to sometimes. 12 essays per term is not it. It's not a good part of student experience. And if you I speak to many of my peers, all of them are struggling. So I really don't think that what Cambridge provides in its academic excellence can directly translate into student satisfaction, so, as you say. In addition, I think it's kind of superfluous, the fact that, for example, Oxford and Cambridge, they're fighting all the time on who's better, because, let's face it, they're fundamentally just the same university that happen to exist in two different places. If you ask me, I can't really tell you why Cambridge is fundamentally different from Oxford, or Oxford is fundamentally different from Cambridge. So when we look at those discussions every year of, oh, this year Oxford ranked higher than Cambridge, or another year that Cambridge ranked higher than Oxford, I think that's just bollocks, I'm sorry. And in addition, when we look at top unis like the London School of Economics, which does not offer STEM degrees, it is heavily discriminated in these ranking systems because, as I said, if you have a STEM department, you're able to churn out more research papers, and that allows you to gain a better score on the research component. And that's why universities such as the LSE, which is very highly regarded if you literally ask anyone, is ranked 30th in the UK, which, again, does not make sense. So, how much time do I have left?
You've got 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, cool. So, before I end, I'm just going to preemptively make a rebuttal. So I know that traditionally, a university's ranking is highly correlated with its students' employability. And it is true that we see a lot of pipelines of, Oxbridge into investment banking, corporate law, consulting. And yes, I do see that. A lot of my peers, they jump straight back. They go back home, they get a nice job, and that's largely because they have an Oxbridge degree. But again, I don't think that this is fundamentally rooted in the ranking of the university itself. It is, again, rooted in the prestige, rooted in the reputation of that university's ability to churn out students who are intellectually capable and also very hardworking, because you cannot be writing 12 essays a term if you're not hardworking. There has to be a way that you're doing that. So, to conclude my speech, when I say I would ignore university rankings. I'm not saying that I would ignore all the factors that come into play in a university ranking. As an international student myself who's paying a huge sum to attend this country's universities, I do care about what I can get out of it, out of this education. But do I care about that number? No. Do I care about academic excellence? Yes. Do I care about the sort of education I can receive, the kind of intellectual stimulation I can get from my supervisions? Also, yes. So, coming back to this motion, I'd just like to have the opposition, answer my question, so as to say. Why is it that university rankings uniquely matter, but not, for example, other metrics such as reputation or academic excellence or historical background that can be measured via, other, let's say, metrics that is possible, instead of using such an arbitrary, very unclear model such as the university ranking? Sure.
You suggest that university rankings are arbitrary, but is reputation and prestige not an arbitrary measure? And how do you quantify prestige?
I do agree that you cannot quantify prestige. But the thing is, when you look at university rankings, it is many things combined in one. As I've said, you have prestige, you have international faculty ratios, student satisfaction, which again can be very easily manufactured. So when you have all of these combined together, it no longer becomes a very representative and reliable metric. And when you look at reputation and prestige itself, yes, it is very subjective. But I do think that we can universally agree that some universities are certainly more prestigious than others. Okay, cool. So back to my question. I don't think that university rankings are uniquely positioned to give us any kind of prediction over a university that any other single measurement metrics such as those I've mentioned can give us a realistic prediction of what that university can do for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ted. I realised I didn't do this at the start, and I really should have, especially if people have never been before. The formats of our debates is that each speaker gets 10 minutes. The first and the last minute of that is protected time. So when the bell rings the first time, that's the end of the first minute. When it rings the second time, it's the beginning of the final minute. The in-between period, a point of information can be asked by anyone in the room, including you guys. If you want to make a point of information, please just stand up, put your hand up, say point of information. The speakers can also bat you down. If any of the speakers want to make a point of information, just so everyone in the room can hear, just come up to the mic. Excellent. Thank you very much, Ted. And now, to begin the case for the opposition, the chair welcomes Oscar Fredrickson, a first-year social policy and politics student at the University of Edinburgh.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the proposition, welcome to tonight. I'm going to ask to do something a little bit different, if you'll let me. I want to guide us away, just very briefly, from the sort of comfort of abstraction that I fear we've already fallen into tonight. And I want to take a look at the experience that I think this motion really gets to the heart of. I want us to forget the neat tautologies and the sort of masterclass in the Cambridge supervision system we've heard so far, and instead consider the moment where you were deciding where to apply to university. I want you to think of the version of you who was applying, the one who was ambitious, the one who was uncertain, the one who was trying to work out where they stood. For me, that was just this time last year, and I'll be honest, I'm one of those people. I despised the incessant talk of rankings. It felt shallow, felt reductive. It was frankly really very exhausting. I wanted to be on the side of the proposition. I wanted to believe that they didn't matter. But what that instinct was, it wasn't clarity. It was simply discomfort. Because disliking a system, that doesn't make it irrelevant. Rankings aren't powerful because they're some sort of objective truth. They're powerful because of the way that they organize behavior, that of students, that of institutions and employers alike. And just so we're clear about the world we're debating today, by ignoring rankings on this side, we see that as the removal as a publicly recognized reference point for applicants, for institutions, for employers, for a wider society. Because my argument tonight, it's not about how information ought to be used in an ideal system. It's about how it's actually used in unequal ones. I'm not interested in a normative fiction where ignoring power somehow makes it disappear. To deny the influence of the way that rankings affect so much behavior in our modern societies, I think that's such an easy thing to say when you've already made it to the top, like all of us. Some more than others, but let's just not talk about that. And in that sense, I think we can't talk about ignoring rankings as some sort of emancipatory liberation. It's really a luxury, because our higher education system, it's one marred and defined by inequality. That's inequality in information, inequality in cultural capital, inequality in life chances. Rankings aren't responsible for creating this hierarchy, though. They are the tool we have to expose it. Pretending they don't exist, it doesn't flatten the pitch. All it does is hand a rule book to the same players who already knew how to play the game. Because universities, they love to pretend that applicants are choosing between clearly defined options. They aren't. We're all choosing under different circumstances. We are choosing under uncertainty. When you apply, you can't really observe course quality in advance. I can tell you I would not have taken social policy and society if that was the case. You don't know what the teaching will be like. You don't know how employers will interpret your degree. You don't know how outcomes will affect you 10 years down the line. But what you do get, you get a flood of reassurances, you get prospectuses that make everywhere sound excellent, and marketing language that smooths away any meaningful difference. That's the context in which rankings matter. It's not because they're accurate, it's not because they're perfect, but because it gives each and every one of us something to orient ourselves around. They are imperfect, they are frustrating, and they are so very easy to criticize. But this is what's important. They're public, they're shared, and in a system where most real information is private, that is what really matters. People rely on heuristics whether we like it or not, and it is not a moral failing. It is a perfectly rational response to complexity. When information is so fundamentally asymmetric, so fundamentally unequal, simplified indicators are there to fill in the gap. So let me ask you all something. When you applied to university, who explained the system to you? Did you have a great teacher? They'd done it before. A parent? Did they already know the names? Friends with older siblings a couple years ahead of you at school? Or were you the one who was trying to figure out all for yourself, a bit of late-night Googling and reading prospectuses? Because every single one of our experiences in this room was different. We went to different schools, we had different advice, different levels of confidence about what counted and what didn't. There was one thing we all had access to: rankings. They're not a gold standard, but they are the way in which we start to speak a common language, a shared reference point in a process otherwise shaped by private knowledge. Because that is where cultural capital does its unseemly quiet work. When formal indicators are stripped away in the world that the proposition so wishes to see, advantage does not disappear. It simply relocates to somewhere far more ugly. It starts to embed itself culturally in things like in accents, in assumptions, in confidence, and in connections. The hierarchy, it becomes less visible, less contestable, and therefore far harder to challenge. So this is the paradox at the heart of the proposition's argument. In attempting to ignore rankings, you risk entrenching inequality. You don't empower the disadvantaged, you privilege those who are already fluent in the system's unwritten rules. And I agree with the proposition. The prestige, it exists whether we like it or not. They somehow seem to think, though, that it's a good thing. That we should be picking our universities based on, I don't know, how old their cathedral is.
Point of information, we don't have a cathedral in Cambridge.
Got me there. Well, really got me there. Anyway, the choice is not, in this case, between hierarchy and equality. It's between hierarchy that's visible and hierarchy that is deniable. Rankings are able to quantify this prestige. And once quantified, it becomes arguable. It can be criticized, it can be challenged, and it can be compared. That is what is so important. When we ignore rankings, we don't abolish power, we merely abolish our power to interrogate it. Because the proposition's faith that prestige is sort of a useful indicator, or conversely, anyone on that side of the argument's idea that it would simply evaporate once we stop talking about it, is an act of utopian substitution. Universities do not exist, they don't exit status competition because we ask them very, very nicely. We all know at this university, we ask our university to do things not very nicely, and yet they still don't listen. But what they do respond to is funding pressures, is applicant behavior, and yes, league tables, regardless of our discomfort with them. Look, I've asked the proposition tonight to be a touch more introspective in their argument, but I think it's only fair that I return the favor. Our university, I love my university. I've met some great people here. I'm enrolled on a course that I truly, truly love. But we have our problems. We're famous for our problems when it comes to, student satisfaction, that little thing that people sometimes talk about. The University of Edinburgh's 2025 annual report, I read it, wouldn't recommend, very boring. It explicitly identifies our falling league table positions as the key driver behind our 2030 student satisfaction strategy. I say this with affection that is not because rankings are inherently virtuous, it's because they exert pressure, and institutions, including our own, respond to that pressure. I'm going to skip a bit. And that matters because rankings are one of the few external accountability mechanisms the universities demonstrably react to. But I'm going to start my conclusion by reiterating my rejection of the idea that this debate can be conducted in the abstract, because it isn't. It's intensely personal. It's about ambition. It's about the insecurities that our ambition produces. Even here, even now, I feel it. Standing in beautiful rooms like this one, I feel it because I'm proud to be here. I'm proud to be speaking to all of you because these universities, they do represent something that I have long aspired to. Look, last year, as an applicant, I wanted rankings not to matter. I want to believe that was the progressive position, but it's not. So when it comes to voting on tonight's motion, I implore you, don't let yourselves down. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oscar. And now to continue the proposition, I'd like to welcome Christopher Lord, a third-year human, social and political science student at the University of Cambridge and the president of the Cambridge Union.
Right. Thank you, Finn, and to the entire Edinburgh Union Committee for the invite this evening. It's been lovely to visit Edinburgh and take in your beautiful city. My only regret is that I'm not going to be able to stay here longer, and that I haven't had as much time to soak it in as I would like to. But unfortunately, 3 years ago, I did not ignore university rankings. Instead, it's my pleasure to come here from Cambridge, which, as our train station will tell you, is the home of a very, very important university. Anglia Ruskin University. Now, I'll take Oscar up on the request tonight to be a little bit more introspective about the University of Cambridge. And I'm going to be really honest with you and come here as a whistleblower tonight to tell you all, especially those of you that are coming to visit us at the end of the month, it actually kind of sucks shit. I mean, go on. Protected time, I thought. But, let me go into why it actually kind of sucks shit. We have this thing at Christ College called the Scholars Ballot, right? Where you get to ballot for a room, ordinarily, as you would any other student. And then if you get a first on your exam, you get to ballot again for a better room. And if you don't get a first on your exam, you're confined to whatever room buried under scaffolding in the back of the college on the busy street where all the clubs are that you get shoved into. On top of that, go on.
Is it not quite hypocritical of you to be criticizing the system when you are the beneficiary of the system, having achieved the first and gotten one of the best rooms in Christ College itself?
I will have you know, I actually got really lucky and didn't use the Scholars Ballot. My heated towel rack, super king size bed, and large room with 6 chairs in it all came without the first. Thank you very much. That aside, talking about rooms, we have this real problem at Christ's where tourists just love walking into the college and walking into the accommodation blocks and just staring into the rooms, like staring through the windows at the rooms. It's bizarre. Sometimes they'll walk in and start taking photos if you have your door open, as if it isn't an accommodation block. I mean, that's not a livable condition for anything. It's honestly a little bit of a miserable university. I remember last year, there was a really interesting story that went viral on our anonymous Facebook confessions page, CamFest, where somebody at a formal dinner, I believe it was, at Corpus Christi College, shat on the floor. I don't really need to say much more about that, except I feel like it kind of proves that people at Cambridge aren't necessarily smarter or better than anybody else in the world. I'll say this, university rankings aren't really anything real or substantial. It's why Oxford, Cambridge, St Andrews, Durham, Imperial, Edinburgh, and so on and so forth all seem to simultaneously hold the status of being the best university in the UK, all at the same time, depending on whether you go to the Telegraph or Times Higher Education or so on and so forth, and the Guardian, and go on.
We've never been first.
I know, you're not in my notes, but I'm trying to compliment you. Instead of being real quantifiers of academic ability or of student experience, university rankings essentially become a tool for universities to look down on other universities, for them to insist to the government and private funders that they need more resources and more funding than their peers. It doesn't expose inequalities. It doesn't give students who are applying tools with which they can navigate the system. It entrenches those inequalities. It means that at the end of the day, the University of Cambridge can go to the government or can go to some private investor and say, look, we're number 1/2/3/4, don't look at Times Higher Education or whichever one says we're bad this week. And, you need to give us more money. Whereas universities that don't rank this highly don't have that ability to point at these league tables, which really mean nothing, in order to demand money from the highest institutions. I mean, at the end of the day, a university like Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, Yale, these big-name universities could do just about anything and barely move in the rankings. Columbia could decide that they're going to completely sell out to the Trump administration, that the Trump administration dictate what they do and don't teach, and what clubs are allowed, and still maintain, oh, hold on, sorry, no, I'm hearing this isn't a hypothetical. That actually just did happen. Now, Oscar, I'll address you directly in some of your points that you've made. Rankings have influence because we allow them to do so. And this, asking whether or not we should ignore university rankings, is a fundamentally normative motion. Because rankings calcify and solidify the inequality that you talk about so beautifully in your speech. These universities get on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and they post about how highly they've ranked. That doesn't help incoming applicants. It doesn't tell applicants, how to handle a Cambridge interview. It doesn't tell people how to use UCAS or what sort of things that they should be looking for or, what sort of writings they should be submitting when they apply to universities. It doesn't help them navigate the situation or the environments that they have to face when they get to university. It gives them a number. Great, I know Cambridge is ranked highly. That doesn't do shit. Go on.
Do you really think a world where the information is only high-resolution pictures and glossy prospectuses with no numbers is inherently better than that, though?
I mean, I just think that ignoring university rankings does not mean that there are no quantifiable tools of recognizing privilege. It's that rankings aren't a tool of exposing privilege. Rankings are essentially equivalent to glossy numbers and high quality, or glossy pictures and high quality photographs, especially when the universities put them next to the high quality photographs on their social media pages. It is functionally the same thing. I mean, listen, I understand that we like to all stand here and believe that, by being applicants in the rat race and by looking at these numbers that we made the right decision a few years ago, that we're at the top of the top now because we had some intuition into the system that was gleaned to us by going onto timeshighereducation.com or whatever the domain name is. But university rankings, in reality, are a distraction from what really matters. University isn't about, how highly you rank, whether that be amongst your peers on the scholars ballot or, certain colleges of the Tompkins table or certain universities when it comes to the Telegraph. And I mean, honestly, go on.
Is it not easy to say that rankings don't matter going in the future and kind of forward in life when you attend a university ranked first or second or third? What about people who don't rank in those top rankings?
Well, this is exactly the point I'm making, right? Is that rankings allow this inequality to fester, and that we shouldn't be looking towards those as, perfect ideas of what the university experience should be based upon, right? Cambridge's academic standing and the benefits that are gleaned from it are not quantified properly by the numbers that the Telegraph puts out. The inequalities that exist are not quantified properly by the numbers the Telegraph puts out. I mean, to be quite honest, look at the bullshit the Telegraph puts out everywhere else. At the end of the day, the time that we spend, the connections that we make in university, the experiences that we have should be the most important things that people consider when they apply to university. And I understand that it can be difficult to actually see what that looks like before you apply. But that's why you have online resources of students talking about their experiences, unofficial prospectuses, all of those sorts of stuff. Things that give you a proper insight into what university life looks like that rankings won't. When I applied to Cambridge, it wasn't necessarily because I saw one ranking and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll send it there. If I did that, I would have applied to a million other universities that I never ended up applying to. It was because I saw that my college had 2 pet cats, who are very lovely, by the way. It's because the Edinburgh Union gives out free chips after every debate. And it's because of a whole host of other factors that I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Might as well send it. I'll never get in. Glad to be wrong. But all of that aside, right, there are so many real reasons and real ways for students to understand why they might want to apply to a university. Rankings, charts, league tables don't really help that at all. In fact, at the end of the day, when you or your children or someone else is looking at where to apply to university, whether that be for an undergraduate degree, a master's, a PhD, or something else, rankings don't actually play as much of a part as you think they might in your decisions. Go on.
The numbers symbolise something. The numbers not only symbolise student satisfaction, as said previously, but also represent things like living quality, the quality of teachers and of labs, for example, if you specialise in STEM. These are an amalgamation of things that independently might evidence that the university is good. But these are just a very simple, straightforward way of presenting that information in an easily digestible way. It doesn't mean that the numbers do not represent something which doesn't exist in reality. These numbers do represent these universities are good for the aforementioned reasons you've given. It just gives you a more coordinated and hierarchical way of presenting it for people who don't have the capacity to slodge through so much information in a very over-flooded market, which is the university market.
Okay, actually, thank you for asking that question because it gets onto a point that I was going to make in just a moment, but I'm going to go straight there now, actually, is that university rankings like to present themselves as such. They like to tell us, oh, well, we've gathered, these reports on student satisfaction. We've gathered these reports on teaching quality. We've gathered these reports on lab quality on X, Y, and Z. But I think taking that as fact and taking these amalgamations of statistics as something valuable misses just how gameable these numbers are. I mean, for different university rankings and different university league tables, some university league tables will rank certain things higher than others. Different things will be weighted in order to give the results that they want. So let's say that, you are making the Telegraph's league table, and you have a particular interest in Oxford or Cambridge or so-and-so being at the top. But all of these universities that typically have this high name recognition have really shit student satisfaction because you have people going around to formal dinners and shitting on the floor. Suddenly, it's very easy to just really, decrease the weight of student satisfaction and increase the weight in, let's say, supervisions or the quality of teaching and things like that. University rankings don't give us a true look into how all of these factors play into each other. Instead, they're gained by the people who create league tables and also, oftentimes by the university in what results and what numbers they provide in order to grant certain outcomes and ideas. And that leads us back to the central point and the reason why I urge you to propose this motion this evening. University rankings, as much as the proposition will try to tell you today, do not expose inequality. They do not tell you, how to game the system, how to get through the system. They do not glean you any important information. Instead, they calcify the very systems of inequality that are so prevalent in society today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christopher. And now to continue the case for the opposition, I'd like to ask Adam Jeffries, a second-year mathematics student at the University of Edinburgh. Adam, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. As enjoyable and entertaining as it was, I'd like to begin by reminding the proposition this is a debate about university rankings and not whether or not Cambridge is a good academic institution. I would then like to request that the House gives me a moment to establish two pillars which will bind my argument together. Firstly, the key principles and purposes of academia and the societal scrutiny of academic institutions. So what are the key principles of academic institutions? A powerful and simple answer might be to prepare much of the population for certain sectors of the workforce. Digging slightly deeper, one might say that the purpose of academia is to conduct research that pushes the scientific boundaries which govern our understanding of the world and indeed the universe in which we live, and to inspect our societal and individual behaviour as we develop personally, as a community, and as a wider global people. I believe that universities act as a bedrock upon which we seek to critically analyse and understand government and culture, artwork and literature. It's a marriage of scrutiny and appreciation that underpins academia's and in turn society's cognizance of itself. This audience and wider society does not require that I or anyone reiterates the importance of universities. However, I believe it is crucial to underline that academia is faltering, and in a world of increasing one-dimensionalism and black and white answers to complex issues, it has never been more necessary. To examine academia's purposes and the principles that ground them is crucial with regards to this debate, as university rankings ensure the maintenance of such tenets. I'd next like to quickly establish a theme of scrutiny, to which many of my points will return. Simply put, university rankings, alongside several governmental and independent regulatory bodies, act as a key measure of a university's continued quality, and critically, university rankings are the only judge with which the population meaningfully interacts. As academia pauses at an existential crossroads, why would the House support a notion that undercuts this effective scrutiny, that keeps the population broadly informed, discourages the stagnation of academic development, and has confidence in student agency? Now, it's an unspoken truth that universities in the UK, and most potently here in Scotland, are being placed under increased financial pressure and are faced with a growing list of incentives to cut corners via technology and an over-reliance on things like AI. Should we abolish university rankings, a pillar of competitive scrutiny, does the proposition truly expect academic institutions to continue to culture high standards and an environment of innovation? Attention to... Of course.
University rankings in Britain didn't really come into a thing until the 1990s. And academia survived a very long time in Britain.
That's fair. Without developing too much on that point, would we argue that the prestige and unfairness of university prior to the 1990s is something that we would like to continue? Furthermore, attention to student satisfaction, staff satisfaction, diversity, employer reputation, faculty to student ratios are all grounded in an expectation that should such issues be neglected, the broader public would become aware, a statement that is entirely unrealistic should such scrutiny be solely conducted by faceless, non-public facing entities. I'd like to build upon the point of a financial incentive, a topic that regardless of this debate is increasingly relevant. In our current reality that exists with university rankings, the integrity and quality of an institution's contributions to academia are examined and reported on. For example, should a university fail to engage in developed research across a broad spectrum of topics, its ranking would fall and it would matriculate fewer students and make less money. Therefore, maintaining a standard of integrity has a legitimate stakeholder incentive that goes beyond idealism as to the principles of academia. Without rankings, universities are not publicly bound to such standards and are bound to cut corners and prioritise avenues that are the most financially opportunistic rather than those which serve academia and society more broadly. The ramifications of monetary undercutting are innumerable, and each feed into the thinning and culting of academic principle. And we've already seen,
you speak about how the existence of university rankings itself bounds universities to standards, but you have not addressed the point that our second proposition speaker made, that is, many of these metrics are very easily gained and are very subject to influence. For example, as repeating what my proposition speaker said, if, let's say, the Times ranking were to prioritize Oxbridge in the rankings, they can simply, let's say, increase the weightings of education, quality of education and deprioritize, let's say, student satisfaction. So how would you respond to that?
with regards to the failures and shortcomings of rankings, I'll address that at the end. Now, we've already seen when squeezed, universities have resorted to the strangulation of the arts and the humanities in favour of financial and corporate incentives of STEM, business, finance, and other corporate tilted degrees. It could be argued that this substantiates the belief that universities are becoming factories that aim to churn out white-collar workers rather than a place of studies and curiosity. However, I've decided not to pursue that argument because I study maths. Alongside the neglect of the arts and humanities, should we have failed to assess universities on the breadth and depth of their research, they're sure to neglect the expensive but vital breadth of postgraduate study. Failure to engage with productive postgraduate research, the continued exploration of a breadth of topics, and the welfare of those who make up an academic body are all logical and potential results that should we abandon university rankings and scrutiny.
Point of information.
I'll hold them off for now if that's okay. To note a more clarified point, the abolition of university rankings blatantly undermines student agency. Do students not deserve to understand the qualities and the shortcomings of their universities? Are we too proud to acknowledge where things ought to be better? Do we seriously expect the population to engage with an academic institution based entirely on reputation rather than empirical and broad examination? Now, I'll admit, when first confronted with this topic, similarly to Oscar, my inherent feelings were to reject university rankings. And I'm sure many of you attending tonight feel the same way. The idea of university rankings rings of the superiority, classism, the imperial past, and the racism that imbibe the histories of many top-ranked universities today. I would implore the House gives this feeling a second thought and comes to feel, as I do, that this gut rejection of rankings is really a rejection of the idea of unearned prestige and built-in unmeritocratic natures that perpetuate many top-ranked universities. Under examination, rankings themselves are not a factor towards such entrenched unfairness. Universities that continue to innovate contemporarily are rewarded, and historically prestigious universities are barred from languishing at the top with faltering standards. I'd like to present an image of an alternate universe without university rankings that strikes me, where universities held in high regard are allowed to coast by on the basis of their reputation and neglect productivity, fairness, and contribution to academic debate. Should the House accept the proposed notion tonight, this is a logical and all too plausible reality to which they will be subscribing and endorsing. Before I end with my concluding thoughts, I'd like to poke a few holes in my own argument and see if I can patch them up for you. I could be giving rankings too much credit as tools of scrutiny. To this, I would argue that no other tool of scrutiny engages with the public and resultantly impacts the widespread regard or finances of an institution. You might say that rankings are not perfect barometers for successful institutions, to which I would agree. However, reform of university rankings is not the same as ignorance and abolition. The existence of rankings could be argued to not have the effect I've described in my argument. For example, many universities in the Russell Group are still held in high regard by the population despite falling in university rankings. To that, I would argue that the very fact is demonstrative of an underutilization of rankings, contrary to a sign they ought to be ignored entirely. Finally, and I think most reasonably, you might argue that I'm being overly cynical, and that surely academic institutions would not sell out and resign their academic integrity the instant we stop publicly scrutinizing them. To that, I highlight the fact that I am not making it about the negligence of academics or students or 99% of the makeup of academia that would catalyze these deteriorations. Rather, I point to those in executive positions. And should you need a clear example, people like Peter Mandelson. Mandelson? Peter Matheson. I'll end with my closing thoughts on the specifics of this debate. The proposition would argue for ignorance of university rankings. Should this be their argument, which it is, they're not saying that rankings have flaws, that rankings need reform, or that we ought to be careful when we consider our evaluation of them. Rather, they are arguing that rankings are undeniably and unequivocally failing and ought to be discarded entirely as a factor that informs our judgment of universities. Else why would we ignore them? To argue for ignorance of an entity is to argue that giving it any attention is wasteful and even harmful. Given the evidence, that is not a reasonable conclusion to draw with regards to university rankings, and hence, the proposition is doing nothing but asking the House to be knowingly ignorant. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Adam, so much. We are now going to have a very quick 10-minute break, but during that break, I ask you to think in your minds, because we're going to be having some floor speeches from the audience, and anyone who wants to say something, please put your hand up. Before then, we also will have Q&A session after the final two speakers, so think of some questions in the break. 10 minutes, guys. See you soon.
Streamlined way to kind of present it.
We'll talk later in the paper. I think we'll also make it.
Essentially, my speech is longer than it should be, so a lot of that is kind of going to go in the speech. That's just kind of saying essentially. No, sort of my conclusion that I missed, so thank you. So yeah, that's the video. And then I'm just going to kind of ask them just, like, they can literally take my notebook and, like, put out some of their points. I'll figure it out.
I trust you.
You did not mention anything about the context in which universities operate, like in terms of the development of the economy that really fosters a particular behaviour of the universities, regardless of whether these ranking institutions exist or not.
Yeah.
Because even if we abolish these ranking institutions, the behaviour of the universities, I argue, will be the same. It will be geared towards satisfying the demands of different actors in the political economy, students, primary financing to universities.
I think we did talk about economic policy.
mate. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm excited for yours.
No, that's not my argument. My argument is that if we abolish these university rankings, the behaviour of the university will not change. And that's a repudiation of their argument that the university will shape the university's behaviour towards achieving these composite features of these rankings. And not towards education and stuff. So that's my repudiation.
It's a good point. The problem is we also want to rely on the argument that rankings do affect behaviour, but in just a more positive sense.
I understand it. A marketing campaign will affect the behaviour of the organisation. But it doesn't mean it's restructured. You know what I mean?
That's a good point.
I like this one.
Thank you very much.
They were like so serious. I was like, wait, I might have a concept of what
No, it's fine, but I think it's like
Varsity doing? I think it makes sense. We do that in the union, we have a side seating committee. So you have like the spats boxes and the seats that run along with the No, I'm enjoying it.
And I showed things on the intro that we filmed for the I need to go myself. That's so funny. Cambridge Union's mentioned law is brilliant. Yeah, I know it's crazy.
I really like it. The old school. Is this one yours? Is that yours? That's mine. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I think it's fantastic. I love the setup. I know. I really enjoy it. Sorry, that's that committee. It's great to meet you. Last time we did Oxford Durham and James twice. So we split the evening. Yeah, it's good fun. I'm going to try and speak on the Varsity debate. Defending college.
One question, how do I test it?
I sound like ASMR.
There we go.
Right, don't. She's not back, so it's going to be really awkward otherwise. I did go out with the garden. He's probably outside smoking.
I'll just say Lords, but not ours. It's 8 o'clock, so he's going to go. Okay, guys. Yo! Hello, thank you very much. Oh, thank you so much. Welcome back. I hope you've had some time to think. Do we have anyone who would like to contribute a floor speech? Hand straight up over there. Excellent.
So first of all, thank you. It's such an honor to give a floor speech at this great debate, honestly. Speeches I've heard today, I have never heard them in this hall. What the point I'd like to make is, as a first-year pharmacology student at Edinburgh celebrating its 300-year anniversary of medical school, and I believe, of course, many might argue that rankings are not don't have direct correlation with the prestige. But I live in a world which is increasingly more mechanistic. We tend to quantify everything. And I believe that rankings are a quantification of the prestige of institutions. So the point I'd like to make is that if we would disregard the rankings, we would disregard the prestige which comes from the history of institutions. In example of Edinburgh, it has contributed so many things in the world of medicine. Things like anesthesia, that disregarding its history and disregarding the prestige with its history would be to disrespect the discoveries made in this institution. Thank you.
Do we have anyone else who would like to give us a floor speech? Ooh. Yeah, go on.
Hello. It's lovely to be here. This is brilliant. Thank you, David, for coming. I think we're in a very, very unique position in this particular debate, in that, unusually for an academic debate, every single person in this room has a prior experience 2 or 3 years ago, probably, of dealing with this issue personally. So it's all well and good going up and saying, I would ignore, I wouldn't ignore university rankings. But we all have or haven't. And deep down, we all know. Now, I think a really, really important subject that's been overlooked by both parties thus far is subject-specific rankings. I do Chinese. Chinese is pretty niche. The year I applied to Edinburgh, Newcastle ranked above Edinburgh for Chinese, as did Oxford, as did Cambridge, as did SOAS. I made the decision to come to Edinburgh. Oxford's Chinese course, being personal experience, is about half classical Chinese. You're effectively learning ancient Greek and Chinese. It's fascinating, but I would like to potentially work there in the future, and I would rather come out speaking good modern Chinese. SOAS, much the same thing. I also don't want to deal with £8 pints in London. I do rather feel that university rankings overlook metrics such as this. University rankings aren't very good at measuring things, intangibles, let's say, such as Edinburgh's fantastic housing stock. You can live in a much, much better place here for cheaper than a lot of other places, and you live in a beautiful, beautiful city. It doesn't factor in pint prices. It doesn't factor in how exactly your course is going to be taught. It also doesn't factor in that, and may sound pretentious, I don't want to spend 3 years of my life in Newcastle.
Any more? Go on.
Yeah, so basically, I think we need to understand the context in which university has to operate. So, since the 1970s, we have the retreat of the Keynesian philosophy, which is manifested in the welfare state, towards a Schumpeterian philosophy, which is manifested in new liberalism, which basically states that we need to emphasize on privatization, deregulation, limited state intervention, and the shifting of risk from the state towards the different actors in the political economy. Therefore, universities has to gear their operation towards satisfying the demands of the main financier of these universities, which are students. What do students demand? Broadly speaking, education, status, employability. And therefore, even if the country abolishes ranking institutions, the behavioral organizations at these universities will be geared towards satisfying the main financiers of these universities. So to claim that these university rankings are some grand conspiracy that shapes the heavier universities, it's not substantiated by any kind of significant evidence. And that's the deeper, let's say, side of this kind of argument which you did not tap into. So yeah, that's the kind of argument I'm making. It does not have that significant impact. If you look at the composite features of these university rankings, they revolve around education, status, employability, and internationalization. Because internationalization is quite important for capturing the financing, making the university go concern in the future. So that's the argument I'm making.
Do we have any more for any more? Oh, okay, sorry.
I kind of wanted to bring to kind of further off on this your point, this kind of busification of universities and how they're being progressively seen as businesses which are aiming to create profits and to have profit margins, as you can see kind of rolling down of rights for employers in these universities like Edinburgh, where there's been obviously this large strike and this large swamp of firing people. And I think it points to obviously the purposes of universities, which I think could have been more appropriately mechanized at the start of this debate. Because when we talk about what universities are for in terms of giving access to for people to this kind of higher form of education which can guarantee them better jobs, although we can obviously debate about the value of an undergraduate degree in this market, we need to talk about how top universities in these rankings stay the top universities in these rankings, not only because they might have something good to them, but also because if you're high ranking, you do get funding from the government. And this almost creates this feedback loop where because you are funded, you then are able to invest, and it maintains this kind of voice hub which is kind of operating at the peak of our current system. And this often means that there's a bias towards these heritage institutions that already had social capital to get the initial investment and to then carry on with this kind of process. And this has often robbed other institutions in, for example, in the north of England, you see this kind of lack of these central institutions, the way they have concentrated in the capitals or in the cities that already have a heritage university established. So when kind of focusing towards the opposition that want to kind of carry on with these rankings being at least a large section of how we perceive our universities and how we fund our universities key, because these aren't just rankings which influence student options, they're also rankings that influence how the government and how organisations invest in universities. We need to start talking about investing in universities in order to improve their future quality of education, not just investing in universities that already have a good quality of education. Because I think one of the issues that university rankings leads to is this circular notion which robs a lot of students from potentially having local universities which need to be funded up to the par that universities should be in, as opposed to concentrating all this financing in only the top universities, which limits, I think, the overall quality of education for a majority of people who want to get into higher education. That's just where I have to contribute.
I did see a hand, just very quick, because we're running out of time.
Can you bring your hand up again? Thanks.
Thank you. So
I'm also a Cambridge student here, but I want to talk a little bit about research and research excellence, and that's something that gets put into a lot of rankings. And I do think that what rankings have often meant that we do is we have to judge an institution on how good quality is your research. And anybody who knows anything about research knows that you can't really give someone else an institution a research grading. So I did an research internship, and every department of every institution needs to have all of their research output will get a grade. Very good, good, and that determines how much funding you'll get from the government. And this is what some people would call the neoliberal university. It sort of builds on what that girl there was talking about. And that we have now universities so much are getting judged based on what is the quality of your output and therefore how much money will we give you. So in my case, we were looking at, there are some academics in my department who are churning out papers, like 10 papers each month, because they're mainly just repeat data sets where they can improve their H-index, their citation metrics, and that will get them more money. And it's like, hang on a minute, if I write a book over 2 years, on a metric, I've got nothing, on a league table, I've got nothing. Now, often some of the best research and books that you've written are actually, or the things that you've studied in your degree are really sort of longer pieces of work, books, sort of theories, but these sort of areas of academia are getting lost in this current obsession with rankings. So I think that rankings do have their use, but we should be nuanced and we should think that what gets measured gets done. And right now we have such a measurement on so many, you could set things, and in terms of research, such as academia, this neoliberal idea that X is better than Y, you should get more money, it means that we're losing the point of what research should actually be, which is to benefit everybody. And not just if it can make money, but can actually benefit society and improve, is it of interest to learn in academia? So I hope that the next speakers also can talk about sort of the importance of research in academia as well.
Thank you so much for all those contributions. And now to continue with our main debate, I would like to ask the third speaker for the proposition, Joshua Delrard, a first-year history student at the University of Cambridge, who's the head of publicity at the Edinburgh Union.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members of the House. Before writing this speech, I decided to read some student reviews about what you all thought about your own respective universities. Since this is my first time in the stunning capital of Scotland in over a decade, I thought that it would be prudent to see what exactly you all thought. One student said, cool libraries, lots of societies, bad support for mental health. A lot of posh folk, but they live in cliques, so you don't really have to interact with them if you don't want to. Another said, stay well clear from this university. That can't be true, right? Should I have cancelled my flight yesterday? Despite that, I love this place. What a fantastic chamber we are debating in tonight. What a fantastic people are sat before me, and what an honour it is to be speaking at the Edinburgh Union. Don't worry, I didn't come here to slander Edinburgh. An Oxbridge student would never be so rude, right? So I thought then, let's hear what my fellow Cambridge students said. Surely they all agree with me, despite what Chris said, that Cambridge is the best academic institution known to humankind. Don't come here. Save yourself and your mental health. Many of the people here are rich and out of touch with reality, and many have serious intellectual superiority complexes. Ouch. I don't have a superiority complex, right? So then, I raise to you this. How can it be said about two of the oldest and most prestigious academic institutions in Britain and the world? Two universities that consistently rank in the top 20 on most rankings. I now bring forth another student opinion. However, this is one of pride and deep affection. I attended this university for my undergraduate degree over a decade ago, and I cherished my experience then just as much as I do now. I wouldn't say there is a worse aspect of my university experience. Can you guess what university that is? And no, don't worry, it definitely isn't Durham. No, the university that the student passionately describes is the University of Worcester. And for the Americans in the room, you may know it as Worcester. I know you all love Scottish universities. Interestingly, despite this, the University of Worcester is ranked 114th by The Guardian this year, which is odd, considering the negative reviews which I outlined prior are from universities ranked in the same table as 3rd and 13th. However, you might accuse me of selecting 2 negative examples for the good universities and 1 positive example for the bad university. My response is that is exactly the point I'm trying to make. If you were to go on Google right now, or God forbid ChatGPT, you would find exceedingly positive, negative, and average reviews about every single university in Britain. And there lies the fundamental issue with university rankings. They are subjective and depend upon personal experience and preference. I'll make a comparison, and this is focused purely on terms of student satisfaction element.
Point of information.
Go on.
Do university rankings not take into account more factors than just student opinion?
And that is what I'm getting on to later. So, I'll make a comparison, and this is focused purely on terms of the student satisfaction element. Let's say I asked you to put everyone you know right now at Edinburgh on a ranking on multiple different metrics: personality, academic ability, past experiences, style of clothing, even cleanliness, friends, enemies, and people you forgot the name of, but since it's no longer Freshers' Week, you know it's too embarrassing to ask. One thing for sure is that you would all rank people differently and prioritise various things based upon your own personal experience of that individual. How many people do you know that you like that other people don't? So therefore, why do we give such credence and authority to these rankings when they depend so much on our own personal bias and perspective? Now, on to my second point. Why are we at university? What is the fundamental point of higher education? And this is the point which was raised over here a minute ago. Is it just to simply get a degree for a job after 3 years? If you think that, university truly has fallen. No. I want to take you back to the origins of university and what university is fundamentally about. The motto of Cambridge is, "From this place we gain enlightenment and precious knowledge." And from the oldest university still operating today, and I recognise that claim is controversial because of the fact that some at the University of FORD, or the place that must not be named, still think theirs was founded in the 9th century. No, the University of Bologna, their motto is, and I think you'll recognise the first 2 words of this from when you've Wikipedia'd celebrities or politicians, Alma Mater Studiorum, which translates to nourishing mother of studies. Both quotes evoke to me the eternal true meaning of university: to attend an institution for the pursuit of knowledge and the advancement of human understanding and academia. Cambridge's motto talks about receiving enlightenment, being in wonder and expanding our comprehension of this world that we briefly inhabit. The University of Bologna goes straight to the core. The purpose of the university is to care and nourish a student academically and holistically, equipping them for life ahead. Therefore, why do we resort to university rankings if the purpose of higher education is expanding knowledge and developing as an individual? These league tables pitch universities against each other and renders education and learning a small endeavour enclosed by a few walls of red brick. When universities research, they contribute to the knowledge of our species, not the knowledge of a specific university. The word university, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, means a place where people study for an undergraduate or postgraduate degree. If a university provides enlightenment, nourishes its students, contributes to research, and allows students to leave with a degree, then it fulfills its ancient quest. Why do we consistently return every year to elitist rankings where the few old universities will retain their position at the top and the rest have to fight it out like it's a form of academic Hunger Games? Why should we compete? Chris, Ted and I stand here before you from a university 354 miles away. Why can the Cambridge Union debate the Edinburgh Union? Because we are more similar than we are dissimilar. There is more that unifies us than divides us. And hopefully we will all leave with a degree that is worth the same. There is a common misconception that if you go to university with a bad ranking, then you won't be successful in life. Well, that just simply is not true. Let's look at Oxford Brookes, ranked by The Guardian as 56th in the UK. From their long list of alumni, you have Steve Ridgway, CEO of Virgin Atlantic from 2001 to 2012, a company which in 2024 had a revenue of over £2 billion. They also had Justin Forsythe, CEO of Save the Children, and then Johnny Greenwood, lead guitarist of Radiohead. Kemi Badenoch, leader of His Majesty's Opposition, hails from the University of Sussex, ranked 52nd. And then Charles Dance, probably one of the best actors of all time, graduated from De Montfort University, ranked 118th. Individuals drive their own successes. Universities merely provide a platform from which to jump forward. Let us take Britain back to the true meaning of education. Let me remind you that university rankings were simply not a thing until the 1990s. Universities survived without them then, and they can survive without them now. Let's stop putting faith in vanity, but rather in learning. As William Wallace said in Braveheart, let us have freedom from university rankings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joshua. And now, the third speaker for the opposition, I would like to welcome Arya Kim, an interdisciplinary futures student, third year from the University of Edinburgh.
I'm sure we're all familiar with the idea that if it isn't broken, don't try to fix it. So who in this room would stand up and say that if it is a little broken, that if it is a little flawed, that if it doesn't take into account every single nuance that has been brought up into this room, it is better to discard university rankings in totality? The burden that is placed on the proposition tonight is not to tell us that Cambridge is ranked first, but it isn't all that, so university rankings must be flawed. It isn't to tell us that people can succeed even if they don't go to the highest ranking universities, so university rankings must be thrown out. It is to engage with all of the benefits that we have brought to you tonight from the opposition as to why university rankings matter, and to tell us that university rankings are so damaging and willfully masking of the truth that it is better if we ignore them entirely. We believe that they have failed to do so under the motion under two questions that have come up in this debate over and over today. Firstly, do university rankings further entrench privilege? Do they make privilege more concrete within our societies and mean that lesser ranked universities are less able to strive forward? Or do university rankings provide invaluable information to people who would otherwise be unable to access this information? And does it mean that university rankings are harmful in this way? The second question that has arisen in this debate is whether or not university rankings actually improve the culture of universities, what universities stand for, and what they are important for in our society. And I'm going to reiterate through the points that have come up today and show you why we win this debate. So in the question of do university rankings further entrench privilege, the first speaker of the proposition told us tonight that it should matter less because university rankings are not nuanced and they may be subjective in some ways. But the thing that they put forward today was this idea of prestige. And I believe that this is fundamental to the reason why we on the opposition believe that if we ignore university rankings, it creates a huge flattening of the atmosphere and the environment by which we rank and think of universities as individual people. Because it creates a flattening of this environment. We all know that Oxbridge are ranked first and second because since days of future past, there have been prime ministers that have come from these universities. There are people who only hire from these universities. There's this idea within society that if you go to Oxbridge, you will get a good job and succeed. But what about the rest of the universities? Who is to say that the rest of the universities, in this huge amalgamation that we exist in, what is to differentiate these places? The floor speeches also came up and brought up the incredibly invaluable point of degree subjects. Sometimes through the tool of university rankings, you are able to understand that some universities, even though they do not have this prestige, are able to excel in their degree subjects. For example, the University of Strathclyde, where would we place it if we did not know about their university rankings, if people did not research how much research they put out, what their teaching was like? But in reality, they have one of the best engineering departments in the country. Would you be able to say that the University of Strathclyde had that sort of facility if you did not know, and all you knew were that places like Imperial, that places like Cambridge and Oxford were just renowned and had a reputation for producing good scientists and good engineers? Secondly, of course Cambridge would be okay if they were judged only on prestige, but I believe that in the world of universities, it's incredibly important to engage with the fact that sometimes people don't care about the prestige, and that's simply one metric. As our speakers asked in points of information, universities ask different things, and in this, one of the major things that came up in this debate was this question of student satisfaction. Student satisfaction goes into many things, but because of the conversation that is started around this number, people are able to agree or disagree. They are able to question the numbers that are put in front of them and have discussions based on those numbers. Would we have the lively discussions that we have on internet forums if we did not have people asking, well, I saw on this university ranking website and I'm trying to decide between two things, what do you think would be better for me? My first speaker spoke about this point from the very beginning of this debate today. What we allow when university rankings are ignored are for these conversations to withdraw back into the back room. If your conversations over the dinner table with your parents already included words like the tripos, if you understood what sort of examination structures existed at different universities, you have no need to look at different ranking systems. However, if you come from an international background such as myself, you are not able to get on a train and walk around these universities. You are not able to walk through the King's Parade or see the different accommodations that the second speaker of the proposition so complained that people came in to look around the university. What you have is the ability that you have on the internet and to understand what people have told you about these things. The reason this is so different, I'll take you in a moment, from university prospectuses is that they give a different perspective on what the university wants to show you in their perspective. I'll take that POI.
So, what's to stop, in the world in which we don't focus as much on, actually, do you want me to come up and say something like that?
Yeah.
In the world where we focus less on university rankings, what's to stop someone from going onto, let's say, the student room and saying, I saw these two university perspecti saying these things about the university, what do you think? What's so fundamentally impossible about having this conversation when rankings are out of the conversation? Because rankings don't tell you anything about exam formats or tripos or anything like that.
I don't think it's fundamentally impossible. What I've been saying is that it starts the conversation. I think that when you're shown a number and you either agree or disagree with it, people are initiated to conversation. This brings me nicely onto my second point about starting conversations that matter, because the proposition brought up a lot of points that talked about media companies, about why media companies dictate what sort of university rankings matter and the conversation that happens around them. But I believe that firstly, if we ignore university rankings, we have to think about the world that would exist if they had never existed in the first place. And I believe that the social capital that university rankings has provided means that in this world that we live in today, where social media has such prevalence, people are able to rank universities on their own as well. A system of university rankings exists on TikTok, where you see people doing S to F tier rankings, and people are free to complain, to disagree, to make their own videos about these things. And this is something that exists and helps and guides people. Because of these conversations that are happening, people might decide to go on and take initiative upon themselves to show other students what their university experiences are like. There's a lively culture of discussion around university life. People make vlogs about these things. People talk about their accommodations constantly, because that is all something that has been highlighted by this metric known as student satisfaction. Finally, to sum up this point about privilege, it's about an access to information. It's about people who aren't able to walk into the rooms that these conversations are already being had, that are able to start it themselves because they see that it has been opened up with numbers. It is the flattening of the idea of what a good university is. It's this creation of a vibes-based culture where we don't actually know what what the 51st ranking is. So there's just good and there's just bad. And the snobberies of the young are able to eat up what actually matters to universities. And also, rankings matter because they are able to open up the conversation for nuance that would otherwise not be happening. Yep.
You speak of university rankings being able to undo entrenched privilege and increased access, but as our side has clearly pointed out, university rankings are deeply flawed and deeply manipulated. So if the starting point of the conversation is a manipulated, flawed starting point, then how does that remove the privilege that those who have true access to, let's say, seeking the people in those universities, how does that remove that privilege if the starting point itself is already uneven?
I feel like this is a slightly repetitive point because I think that the idea of flawed university rankings has already been brought up, that people are able to have conversations around them. But I think that they remove privilege because once those conversations are started, you're able to question what would have otherwise been something that you cannot question because they're what is said by hearsay between people in closed rooms. Finally, do universities' rankings damage or improve university culture? What I mean by university culture here is a rather wide-spreading term about every term that's been thrown around in this debate, whether it be research, whether it be student satisfaction, whether it be international students coming to universities. Because what it matters here is that none of these metrics, whether they are exactly correct or exactly incorrect, actually is a good enough reason to ignore university rankings as a whole. We think that on the opposition side, we've talked continuously about whether or not they can be improved, whether research is something that should matter. But when you are able to have these numbers and universities are held to account based on these numbers, when the literal prospectus of the university is telling you that they are looking at these numbers and that they want to improve them, that is something that makes people sit up in their seats and try to engage with them. It is one of the things where students in this room who have been protesting, the lack of tutorials, the lack of student satisfaction at this university is able to go and say on boards and report back to media companies and report on TikTok that they're able to say that these things are mattering to them and they're going to try to get the universities to move on them. Without this sort of system, ask yourselves what would actually happen to the best universities firstly. Would they continue to try and curate this idea of research and curate this idea of student satisfaction where they invest heavily the way that Cambridge does because they are continuously acknowledged for their system of support for their students' academics? If they were not asked yearly whether or not these things mattered, if they simply got to rest on their laurels and say that they were the best university in the world and no one was really able to question them in any meaningful sort of way. I think it's important to acknowledge that finally different university rankings rank different universities as the best university in the world. But that is not a bad thing. That does not mean that university rankings are completely incorrect. It simply means that different people prioritize different things, and that is being highlighted by university ranking systems. I ask you to vote for the opposition, to vote for the importance of university rankings.
Thank you very much, Aria, and thank you to all of our paper speakers this evening. We are now going to go on to the Q&A section, but just before we do that, I just want to say that afterwards we will all be heading off due to the death of Washbar. We will all be heading off to Potter Row, where we'll all get the opportunity to speak to the speakers and have a good drink. But in the meantime, let us go on to the Q&As. And does someone have a question? In fact, I'll go for the person behind you simply because you had a speech earlier.
As of July 2025, I officially graduated from Varsity University with a degree in politics and summation. Currently ranked 63rd in the Times, and presently holds some of the top academics focusing on Welsh governance and devolution, an area I chose to specialise in. Providing specific courses in this area, which I was able to pursue, and the ability to receive experienced guidance as I entered my
when we look at the different ways we regard universities and particularly how they do well in certain topics, Aberystwyth is a perfect example where a flourishing politics department is recognized by rankings. I'd ask you the question, in a hypothetical world where they don't exist, as was just emphasized upon by our third speaker, would you have known that Aberystwyth had this strong political department? Would you have known that they could support you in your learning and your development of research? We would argue no. We would argue that without these rankings...
Point of information.
Yes.
Would it not be also possible to argue that universities, in pursuit of gaining higher rankings, push away these, niche subjects? Like, take, for instance, the Birmingham City University and Black Studies, which, couldn't necessarily fulfill the right faculty-to-student ratio. It's not through rankings that students find needs, but through research, is it not?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. However, the point is ultimately that without scrutiny and without these rankings, what incentive do universities have beyond an idealism about academic principles?
I think we'll do a right to reply instead of points of information in this section.
Beyond academic scrutiny and scrutiny of academic institutions, what incentives do universities have, aside from idealism about academic principles, to explore underfunded and under-researched avenues? We would argue that rankings, although not perfect, provide a broad set of biases from a broad range of media, markets, and an interaction with the population, which suggests the population wants broad research. Does the financial market want broad research? Do universities' cash want broad research? Probably not. But a population which asks them to incentivizes this, and that's expressed through rankings. Thank you.
My apologies for POIing you. I was not aware we had a right to reply. I'd like to sort of propose the opposing argument to that, in that I don't think the university rankings provide the foundations for niche subjects to be studied. In fact, I think we've seen time and time again, universities will often throw out courses that they don't have the ability to maintain low faculty to staff ratios for, in order to make sure that they're able to get higher or better numbers when it comes to university rankings. We see time and time again, smaller universities essentially selling out, trashing courses which are internationally and nationally renowned, which have immense rates of student satisfaction, in order to make sure that they can keep climbing up the university league tables. We've seen this with Black Studies, we've seen this with the vet school at Cambridge, we see this where universities at any cost will not go for what, their students or what the people prefer, but they will go for what's financially expedient and what makes them able to, as it's been said time and time again, thrive in the neoliberal system of universities. At the end of the day, that isn't about student satisfaction. It isn't about broad, detailed, or nuanced research. It's about maintaining the ratios and the numbers that look good on paper, even if it comes at the expense of academic integrity and academic pursuits.
It's a really great argument, because everyone agrees these things are being undercut, and everyone agrees that this is a failing of universities. However, if we remove rankings, who's checking? Who's checking whether or not they continue to do applied and broad research? And who's holding them accountable if not rankings? And if not the monetary effects that will happen if they dip in the rankings, and should they be scrutinized correctly, matriculate fewer students?
Do you have another question? Excellent. Crop of hands. Right at the back.
I understand that one of the benefits and negatives as well, as both sides have presented, of the tables is that they condense a huge amount of information, and that's both bad and good. But this has more been focused on within the UK. If you're looking at applying internationally, when there are so many of these and there's so much information, does the condensation of the information not become invaluable and a really, really helpful thing?
So you guys.
As an international student myself, I can answer you that question. I'm from Hong Kong, and traditionally in Hong Kong, we're known to have three big universities. The Hong Kong University of Hong Kong, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. However, if you notice in recent rankings, you'll notice that the City University of Hong Kong has basically taken over the University of Science and Technology. And why is that? It's because of the rankings focus on, let's say, international faculty, focus on exchange opportunities, which I don't deny, they are important, but are they the most integral part to education? I'm sorry, I don't think they are. When you look at rankings, for example, in this case, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, because they don't provide humanities and they only provide STEM subjects, that already causes an inherent disadvantage to them. And I've illustrated this point in the UK as well with the London School of Economics. So I don't really see the point why a sort of holistic model will be inherently invaluable if, as the proposition has already established, that most of these factors are either not very relevant or can be easily manipulated. And if you put out a giant slop of either, not irrelevant or manipulated factors together, the result is not going to be something that is credible for you. Thank you.
I think that, this is just my right to reply on that point, but I believe that the proposition slightly misses the point that was asked in the question there about the value of having condensed information being given to us, whether or not it might be biased. And I've said time and time again that, again, if you wanted to be the person who went out and asked the questions, who asked about the student-faculty ratio, who asked about the societies, because that is the things that you care about, that's probably what you are going to do. What the packet of information gives you to international students who do not know everything about UK universities is that they're able to see and choose what matters to them based on different rankings, such as degree subjects. This also connects slightly to the point brought up by the second speaker about smaller, niche subjects. I ask you, why can't international universities and smaller universities fill the gaps when you can literally click on, Black studies or Aboriginal studies? You're probably going to get an area, a university maybe located in Australia that specifies on Aboriginal art, because that's where all of the experts are. So that if somebody who wants to study those sorts of things from the UK or from any part of the world wants to find those universities, they're able to access these resources and find their way around what is becoming a more and more expensive, convoluted, and international system, which is exactly why we believe that university rankings are important.
I want to respond a little bit to that point about the niche subjects once more, because I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the role that rankings play in our analysis of, in our analysis of, what universities provide and how we can obtain them. The opposition continues to tell you that rankings allow students to see where these niche subjects are best taught. It allows students to see, we can look at the rankings for Black studies or Black British studies and see that the best universities are X, Y, and Z. But these rankings and these league tables overall, the immense condensation of all of this information, to bring it back to the central point, to the immense condensation of all of this information on an international scale discourages these efforts to pursue niche subjects and instead encourages universities to focus on things that look better on paper in the broader picture. If you don't have a lot of students matriculating for, let's say, Black studies, if you don't have a lot of students matriculating for Aboriginal studies, if you don't have a lot of students matriculating for, the School of Veterinary Health, then you have an incentive to cut the students, to cut the faculty, to cut those subjects as a university in order to increase your overall numbers. That's what this condensation does. We don't see the forest for the trees, and it means that we're unable to actually understand the value of these niche academic subjects.
Just briefly before we get another answer, they're great points, but they have nothing to do with university rankings, and it's not providing an answer to the question as to how we fix this problem. It is a problem. University rankings may contribute to some of the reasons why we're able to fix it. I'm not saying it's the whole fix, but ignoring university rankings isn't either.
So if university ranking was to be ignored, then what do you propose to be the best metric that can take into account all the parameters that matter to help
Hi, me again. I'll go ahead and sort of respond to that idea, because what we think it should be is that it should be a more sort of individual process. We think that these large amalgamated university rankings try to condense too much data in a way that ultimately harms students when they're applying for universities. We think that the idea that rankings level the playing field and the idea that rankings, illuminate students' eyes is a fundamental misconception, and that there needs to be better efforts, not just by individuals, but also by universities and by different systems in and of themselves, to actually illuminate and make sure that students have the support in the university application system, rather than these big tables which don't actually show students what matters and what should matter in the application process.
To summarise that point, the opposition is suggesting that it's an individual responsibility to understand universities without rankings. And we understand there is individual responsibility, and you're welcome to use that responsibility, research rankings, and decide which university is right for you. But why place that pressure entirely on the individual when we can have a system that aids and abets that? I don't understand why we say individuals should entirely base their assumptions on their own research, when we can use the research of others and combine that with our own opinions to form a proper and strong decision.
Sorry, just because of time. I saw a hand just at the back there. Yeah.
At the risk of beating a dead horse, would the proposition acknowledge that the idea that if we get rid of rankings, this sort of idea of universities, and I'm not arguing that rankings are perfect, I didn't really consult them much myself when applying to university, I more went off things like prestige and reputation. But, again, at the risk of beating a dead horse, the proposition not acknowledge that coming from Cambridge University, the elbowing that Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, LSE, Harvard, Yale, etc. can do maybe outweighs the amount of cut-through that any lower-ranked university would have in the absence of rankings.
Sorry. So essentially, we want to make the point, or there's one point that we think is really crucial here, in that rankings don't actually help lower-ranked universities. Instead, what's more likely to happen is that, like has been said by the opposition today, universities that rank lower in the university rankings are less likely to matriculate high numbers of students. They have less funding allocated towards them. They're less able to hire staff. They're less able to improve the factors that need to be improved in order to climb the rankings, because they aren't able to go around and show big donors and the government that, oh, this table here says that we're number one, and so they end up suffering. It creates this sort of feedback loop and death row and death spiral in which the poorest universities, the universities with the smallest endowments, with the least amount of funding, suffer the most. And the bigwigs, the Oxfords, the Cambridge, the LSEs of the world, can do just about anything. They can shut down crucial and vital centers of research, or they can kowtow to authoritarian administrations and maintain their rankings in spite of it.
I understand we're pressed for time, so I'll make a really simple counter-argument here. I believe it's evident of the weakness of the proposition that you're sending one incredibly charismatic and great debater up again and again to beat what has been rightfully called a dead horse. We've got to save time, so that's all I got.
I believe that the proposition has equal footing, if not more, to say that the opposition has been conducting the same activity, so how hypocritical of that. But in response to that question very quickly, as we have said, if you care about this Oxbridge clique, then you should recognize that they have been enabling, they have been solidifying their position, their prestige, their ability to attract, let's say, international students through what? Rankings. So what do we do about it? We should ignore rankings and actually look at, for example, do your own research into which universities, like Strathclyde, are actually good for engineering. So if you do care about the big clique of these elite universities, taking away opportunities from less renowned universities, then rankings are not the option. Thank you.
because we've pressed the time, we're only going to have one final question, and I want all debaters to answer it quickly. There's lots of people behind it. This is a conundrum. I think, apologies to you all. We'll go for the person there.
Okay, considering the debate surrounding only UK universities, basically, I'm curious to know what the opposition thinks of the prestigious non-UK universities, specifically in Italy, France, and Spain, that have historically had and continue to have incredibly rigorous academic curriculums, but do really badly in international rankings due to the hegemony of the English language in academia.
I think that something that I've been wanting to say is internationally, there are universities such as in Spain and France and Italy that have done incredibly well on university rankings because of their job applicants, for example, like business schools out of Switzerland and business schools out of Italy. And these are things that are represented in international rankings in a way that I would never have known to look at ETH Zurich or these universities if they had not been listed on a literal list in front of me on the QS university rankings. If people who are looking at studying abroad for a year go onto QS university rankings, you can learn about what universities in Australia and what states are the best universities for you to go to, and you can experience those universities. Maybe those universities will open up pathways for you to go and do master's studies abroad. I think that what these do is it actually brings together a far more international community than what would exist if we didn't have university rankings. What we have asked the proposition time and time again is to imagine the world in which we do not have rankings, and all they have been able to give us today time after time is individual research. I am unable to go onto the ETH Zurich website and look at the Swiss German that they have produced their prospectus and think about, what are the weights of different faculties and whether or not this might be right for me. I'm unable to go and ask students from ETH Zurich or these French, Spanish universities what sort of societies were available to them when they went to university there. But that is something that is being done in the research that is provided, because that is what is being asked of those university ranking services. When people go, they don't just say, give me a number from 1 to 100 and tell me what the best universities are. They ask questions of these people. People are able to interpret these results and give their opinions on them, and that is why university rankings are incredibly important for the international scene and to connect universities from all over the world, which is what we want from an international, globalized academic scene.
And I'll say to the opposition, I'm not Chris, just to clarify. I think the question raised over there raises a very good point and actually expands the issues of university rankings to the international level. I mean, we were quite generous, focusing on the inequalities that exist in Britain, especially between elite institutions and then other universities across the nation. However, I counter to that is how can you compare universities between nations across the globe that each have their own different socio-economic, cultural, and then established backgrounds and, through funding directly into universities, how can you compare institutions from separate parts of the world when it is difficult to compare these universities in Britain in itself?
Thank you very much. We will now have the summation speeches. These are the final speeches the night before we vote. Here at the Edinburgh Union, we vote with our feet. So once the final speaker has spoken, I ask you to either, if you want to vote for the proposition, to leave through that door. If you want to vote for the opposition, to leave through that door. And now, for the summation speeches, may I ask Otter Ferguson to come up and sum up for the opposition.
It's been a long night. I'm going to keep it quick. I've also had a glass or two of champagne in the break, so I think that's best for all of us. I heard a lot about the University of Cambridge tonight. I learned a lot about the University of Cambridge tonight. I haven't learned a lot about why we should ignore university rankings. I don't really know what went on behind the scenes when this motion was decided and sides were allocated. This was a tough motion for the proposition. The burden of proof was on the proposition to make a case, a complete, coherent case, that we should, as a society, completely and fundamentally ignore university rankings. Not only that, we didn't even hear any contest to our definition of the motion. This entire debate has gone on along the lines of our definition that removing or ignoring university rankings means no longer considering them as a public point of reference. That is not a standard that they have lived up to. That is not a case that they have made. What you have heard tonight from the opposition, by contrast, is a case started by myself on the importance of university rankings as a rational and crucial safeguard against creating a higher education market that is dominated by unseemingly unearned privilege from unseemly backgrounds historically rooted in classism, in elitism, in racism. You've heard from Alex the value of university rankings as a measure of accountability. You heard from Adam that. Whoa, you threw me off. As both an internal and external driver of accountability. Then we heard from our first speaker in the proposition about the superiority of Cambridge. I'll be quite honest, I couldn't remember much else. At the last second, though, in an answer to a question from the audience, we heard that he seems to actually endorse subject-specific rankings. I think that would have been good if it was made clearer far earlier in tonight's debate. We heard from our side about the importance of a return to academic principles. We measured our case against the fundamental goal of universities, about the importance of student agency. Then we heard from Chris that university rankings entrench inequality. But this was an argument that he made by simultaneously lambasting while equally relying on subjectivity. You scorn, you scathe the idea that the composite university rankings are made of hundreds of measures in some instances. In some instances, yes, that incorporates subjective measures, but then we're told that we shouldn't use them at all because of the subjective experience at the University of Cambridge, that it is not all that. From our third speaker, we had a very entertaining discussion. It was very exciting. The only note I have in my notebook is that we are told that university rankings are bad because Kemi Badenoch went to a not very highly rated university. Even if I had the time, I'm not really sure I'd want to go into that. Look, we're not saying on our side that university rankings don't need to be reformed. They clearly do. There are clearly issues. They put pressure unnecessary on institutions, on students, on applicants. But what I've talked about is the main point that I want to get back to and that I want to leave you and the proposition with tonight is about that sort of conflicting sense of prestige. My primary and first point that as an opposition we have centered our arguments around. You see, I came here expecting the proposition to argue for equality, to argue for moral justice, to make an exciting normative case for destratification. But from the very offset, from our first speaker, we were told to ignore university rankings and instead rely wholly on empty prestige. If that logic reaches even here to people who are debating at some of the best institutions in the world, then I know it will be reaching far beyond this room. It will be reaching the students who are still deciding to apply at all. Picture one of them. Picture a student who is bright and curious and working relentlessly. Their school, it's underfunded. Their teachers are stretched thin. Their parents want to help out, but simply don't know how. The proposition wants to tell them that they would be freer in their world. They wouldn't. In your vote tonight, don't let that kid down. Don't let yourself down. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now to sum up the proposition's argument, I invite once again Ted Yip.
I would first like to start by applauding the opposition for fundamentally misrepresenting our arguments despite our repeated attempt to explain to them what we're trying to say. That is a feat that I cannot aspire to achieve. We did argue for equality and destratification, and we stand here on the proposition of this motion today because we're repeatedly told both the opposition and the audience members that university rankings is what entrenches these privileges that universities continue to receive. The only argument that the opposition is to be able to put out regarding equality is that rankings provide access to information, in which our side has argued such information is deeply flawed, fundamentally misguided, and will fundamentally entrench those inequalities, because those who do not have access to, let's say, students who are studying in those universities and are able to tell you, for example, how an Edinburgh medical school is actually not as, well organized as it seems. We have told you that instead of rely on university rankings, you should be speaking to people on, let's say, the student room, or you should be speaking to those who are studying in subjects that are about to be cancelled because of universities chasing prestige. So fundamentally, we stand here in this room today because the opposition has made the fantastical argument that university remove privilege. It does not. And if you think that you do not disagree with the clique of, let's say, Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, Edinburgh, whatever uni it might be, keeping to feed into this feedback loop, as, again, the opposition has mentioned, the feedback loop in which government spending keeps going onto those universities who rank the highest, but not those who need it the most, where international students, which arguably form a very large portion of universities' revenues because of the extortionately high international school fees, again, going to those who rank the highest, then we should ignore university rankings and start looking at other metrics that actually matter. For example, whether a university can fundamentally do well in what these rankings cannot capture, and what these rankings have been designed to misguide you from, and what these rankings have been designed to distract you from. So, to sum up, the opposition speaks of convoluted sociological terminology like cultural capital, like structural inequality, like institutional racism, yet they have repeatedly failed to consider how university rankings are the culprit in reinforcing these inequalities. So, if you want to envision a world where universities who do not have the visibility they deserve can finally receive the attention they deserve, can receive the funding that they deserve, subjects that are underappreciated, that are on the brink of dying, can receive the attention that they should be receiving from universities who now only care about university rankings, then please join us in voting for the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. coming, and thank you once again to our guests from the Cambridge Union. They've been wonderful. I hope to see you all in Potter Row once again to vote for the proposition through this door, to vote for the opposition through this door. Have a great night, everyone. See you at Potter Row.